Thanks for coming here tonight. My name is Joe Rankin. I am the head coach of Bettendorf High School in Bettendorf, Iowa, and I am going to be leading the discussion here for Lincoln Douglas debate on the new topic. And I have sharing powers, so I am going to attempt here to share away, and hopefully everything will go perfectly fine and dandy. We will find out. So let's click here, let's hit share. And hopefully you can see this lovely PowerPoint thingamabobber as we get going here. Let me go slideshow and from beginning. Everyone seeing that okay? Is that on the screen? All right, thank you. All right, as we get going here, I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview. This is all part of Jesse's Dog of War debate. And if you want to talk to your coach or go through anything, he does have a lovely website link down there, thedogofwardebate.com. And he does a bunch of different services. You can go through that as you will. But we're going to go through the LD topic overview for January, February 2026 here today. The first thing I always like to do is just to make sure we know what the topic is because sometimes, well, we don't. And so making sure we know that wording is right there on the screen. The possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. And this was voted on at the National Speech and Debate Association by 682 coaches and 2,996 students. And you can see the vote total there. And, just to start us off there, of course, I like to share that lovely thing that says, one nuclear bomb can ruin your whole day. And not only are we going to try to ruin your whole day here necessarily, but we are going to be talking about this topic for quite some time. At least in my part of the country, which is the Midwest, the January and February topic is basically the topic that we do for the rest of the season. And so I'm not sure if that's true in Washington or New York, or if it's just, the tournaments that I go to in my region. But I know that this topic area is going to be covering not only the January and February tournaments in general, but also our district tournament, a state tournament or two, and so on and so on. So I know it's going to be a very important topic, at least for my part of the country. And so we're going to try to talk about that in a way to help you get started in an educational way and those kinds of things. And so hopefully it'll be pretty clear where we can start. And at least I'll give you some breadcrumbs in order to go through and figure out where you can go with the topic. And after this event, Jesse is going to be sending out a packet of information that not only covers what I'm going to talk about tonight, but it'll go much further in depth, of course, as well, along with giving you some evidence and guidelines to get you started. And so that's the goal. So, first and foremost, some definitions. I always think it's important to understand how the topic breaks down and to see some different implications of what those words are. At least that's one of the things I like most about Lincoln Douglas debate is because this is meant to be like lawyers in a courtroom. And because of that kind of mindset, you do have to understand what the topic is talking about. And so, in terms of this case, possession is kind of interesting. And we have three different definitions up here, as you can see on the screen. The state of having, owning, or controlling something, the fact of having or owning something, or having physical custody or otherwise exercising dominion or control over a tangible property. The reason that is kind of interesting and why it has some implications to this is as we're going through here, we have to realize that, especially with nuclear weapons in this context, we not only have people who actually have the nuke weapons, like the United States and Russia, but they're also in other countries and around the world. So, like the US has satellite installations all over the world where we could, of course, attack Russia and they could attack us that are closer and those kind of things. And so, one of the more interesting parts of this topic that you can do just based on this definition is talk about those bases that are in other countries, but they're not in the United States or they're not in Russia. So, like for the longest period of time, the Ukraine had Russian missiles in Ukraine because it used to be part of Russia, and then it wasn't part of Russia. So, what happens when that kind of scenario happens when a country changes hands or at least changes governments or those kind of things? It's an interesting thing to think about, especially when you're talking about a legitimate government that falls or changes hands or changes regimes, and it still has weapons from another country, i.e., the United States or Russia, and how that might have implications. And so, by default, you are going to be talking about who controls those weapons and where it is located, which is going to typically be the same place. But realize, especially with US and Russia, that is not always going to be the same across the board because there are going to be different places where they'd be covered under our protection or our nuclear umbrella, but they won't necessarily be our physical territory. So, possession, kind of an important word there. As hard as it is to believe here, nuclear weapons, I think, is the least controversial topic, at least wording wise, in terms of this particular resolution, because we kind of have an idea of what they are. And so I'll go through these, but nuclear weapons are explosive devices that derive their destructive force from nuclear reactions, either fission or a combination of fission and fusion. And you can look at the other ones; they're not too different on that respect. But of course, I threw out a Fallout picture on here just to have some funsies with that one. But there are some different things that are going on with the definition of nuclear weapons. Like we do have the traditional, just bomb that blows up a city, that kind of thing. But you might find some topic literature that's going over newer, smaller devices or, hypersonic missiles that are deliver them faster. I've even seen some nuke, like literal hand grenades kind of thing that's supposed to be going against like troop level things. But nuclear weapons, generally speaking, is going to be just talking about like weapons, though. And that is kind of the key element here, regardless of how you're going to divide what nuclear weapon you're talking about. The intent here is a weapon, though. The intent is something that is going to cause destructive power that explodes. So at least we get out of the nuke energy comparison kind of things with this particular wording. And, so it's a much more narrowed, focused kind of topic here. But nuclear weapons, pretty much what you've been thinking about since World War II and, keeps us up at night. Now, the fun word, at least in my regard, besides possession, is immoral. And it's not because immoral itself is difficult. In fact, you can see these definitions are, for the most part, clear cut. Not conforming to accepted standards of morality, ethically wrong. Morally wrong are outside society's standards of acceptable, honest, and moral behavior, or a moral wrongness referring to action or states of affairs that violate moral norms, duties, or principles such as rights, justice, or human well being. Those are all going to be the main part of those kinds of definitions. But I will say that there is quite a bit of different things on this topic because who defines what is moral or immoral, or even more fun, as the graphic on the left side says, amoral. There are typically three different types of morality that we're talking about there, and that's just in the definition level debate. But moral is what I think is basically right. Immoral is what I think is basically wrong. But when you're looking at a society, I think we'd probably all agree that there is going to be a different subset of what is morally right and wrong in America versus what is morally right and wrong in, I don't know, China, Russia, and et cetera, North Korea. So I would make sure that you are, when you're approaching the topic, that you are making sure that you're contextualizing your topic properly when you're talking about a moral. And I would also really consider that idea of what moral immoral and amoral kind of are, because as you approach the topic, especially from a more philosophical backing, that amoral might sneak into some rounds and really affect things because some things are not right and wrong. Some things are right dead in the middle and they don't have a moral implication either way. Like you don't really care what I ate for lunch today. It isn't morally right or wrong, but you probably do care if I like, kill a baby or something, right? Like that would have some moral implications, or at least so I hope. So in terms of things, I would make sure that you're thinking of that definition level and seeing what kind of morality lens your topic debate will be going through. Because I do think this definition debate level is going to be interesting with this topic. All right, going to go through a little bit of history. Jesse has done a great job in terms of the packet that you're going to be getting after this that goes through this much more in depth and gives you much more detail level. But I do think it's always important when you're looking at something, especially from an education point of view, that you understand where all of this came from. And one thing that when I was reading through this, it's just kind of hard to like put your brain around a time frame for this kind of stuff. But in 1896 is when they discovered radioactivity, figuring out, that the pieces of the atom and those kind of things. Einstein's mass energy equivalence, 1905. That's where they started figuring out, like, hey, if I break this atom, I'm going to get a whole lot of energy. Then the discovery of nuclear fission in 1938 and 1939. They started figuring out the pieces of, like, oh, we're going to be able to do this and it's going to have a whole lot of energy. And oh, crap, the Germans are getting this. Oh, we better hurry it up. Manhattan Project. And if you've seen Oppenheimer or, with Barbie, the Barbieheimer, or however that kind of phrasing went, you're definitely going to be getting a much deeper understanding of that. So Manhattan Project was good, although the nudity was a bit high for me. I didn't know why that was there, but whatever. Then we went into the Manhattan Project, made a big bomb, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Then we got into this early international efforts, and that's one thing I wasn't quite aware of that Jesse had put into his packet of info when I was reading through. And I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but the Burke Plan in 1946 was interesting to me because it was a plan that said, you know what, these nukes that y'all made, maybe no one nation should have them. What if we made like this international, everybody has control over it kind of thing? And maybe that will be better because then it's not one country or one particular stance, like having control over something that can literally blow up cities and states and all those kind of things. And, it's kind of hard to believe, but the people who had the nukes, the United States kind of went, nah, let's not do that. That doesn't sound too good of an idea. So we said, let's not do that. So there was some early international effort, though, even in the 1946, right after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to say, like, here's something that we should do. Instead, we went to a different plan, or at least something that we lovingly call mutually assured destruction, where we all agreed that if I blow you up and you blow me up, we all dead. So it went around the globe there, and we all agreed that it's too dangerous to attack us, and so we had peace in our time, which led to 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, where now that we had, five or so countries who had nukes, we all agreed that we would keep them and no one else would have them. Yay. Let's establish this, line in the sand that says we are good and the rest of you shouldn't have them. And we all agree you shouldn't have them. It's one of those things, one of those things. We like that. And yes, Ultron, peace in our time indeed. But mutually assured destruction occurred, nuclear non-proliferation treaty. The fun part of that treaty in 1968, at least one of the fun things, there's lots of fun things. I love international treaties that aren't really enforced or, have any teeth to them and stuff. But this one said, hey, we're all signing on board that we're not going to let any other people get nukes, and we promise that we aren't going to give it to them, and we promise to like slowly get rid of our nukes because we understand that they're really bad. 1968. Yeah. Anyway, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, 1991, jumping ahead quite a bit there. But when we look at that, that is a agreement, basically the United States and Russia, and I think those are the only two. But still, we said, hey, we're going to start slowly lowering our numbers of nukes. We promise we're going to start getting rid of those things. There was a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty in 1996 where we said, you know what? It seems that when we blow up these nukes to test them, it damages the ground and the water when it's on the ground. Hey, when we blow it up in the air, it seems to damage the air and other things. So maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. And we all agreed, except for people who didn't sign. And then North Korea, I think, was the last test that I'm aware of in like the late 2010s when they blew up their mountain. And then they went, oh man, that was bad. And they stopped too. But now there's a new treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I think it's signed by roughly 80 different countries around the world. And they said no one should have nukes ever. We swear it's really, really bad. And they all agreed, and not one person who had nukes signed on. I know. Shocker. But everyone else did. It's one of those deals. So there's a brief history. Jesse's going to go on with this lovely document that has a whole lot more detail, but that is the Cliff Notes version of that. But we love nukes, is what this is all about here, right? All right, the next one. This slide kind of goes over those numbers, and it says, here are your nuclear states, official and unofficial. So we have Russia weighing in at 5,400 total nuclear warheads. And you'll notice here on the lovely little picture here, it does say they have 4,300. That's because they retired 1,150. So those aren't really like usable, but it's nuke stuff. So it's not like it disappears. You can't like throw it into the sun via the old Superman movie that none of you are old enough to know what I'm talking about. But there are some lovely things out there. But Russia, the United States, China, France, United Kingdom, there's our old guard, the ones who, the NPT, yeah, you know me, the ones that signed on board and stuff. And then we got our newer members who got them so that way they didn't have to fight anymore. India and Pakistan, who both have nukes around the same number, so that way they can die very quickly if they ever shoot each other. Mad. And then we have Israel, our unofficial number, because Israel will not confirm or deny that they have nukes, but they have nukes. And so they have 90 of them to watch out for people. And then, of course, we have North Korea, the little communist nation that could, who wants to make sure that they too have their nukes, and they have them over there at the number of 50. And if you really want to see a good time, you have to watch some of those Kim Jong-un videos. He has a whole lot of ones where he's like Rocket Man, and he dresses in like these bomber jackets, and he takes off his sunglasses quite a bit. He looks like, I think he looks like Tom Cruise a little bit, or at least that's what I think he thinks he looks like. But it's a fun little thing. You should go watch that. It's a great video. All right. One of the biggest things I would recommend on this topic is get your framing down. What I mean by that is even before you pick your value and your criterion, even before you talk about like the exact wording, you have to choose how you want to approach this topic. And part of that is like looking at the evidence you have. Part of that is understanding the topic the way you want to. But I'm going to go over three different approaches that I think are pretty critical to understand and to kind of like see how they approach the topic differently. And I'll go through just one by one these approaches before even talking about the topic itself. So first and foremost is utilitarianism. This is a form of consequentialism, but if you want to talk about this, the very basic definition is it is generally thought that on the utilitarian view, one ought to maximize the overall good, that is, consider the good of others as well as one's own good. And that's from Standard Dictionary of Philosophy. And if you want to boil it down further, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And so the classic example here, as the picture shows, is the trolley problem, which if you want to see a good place, I think it's season 2, episode 5. You too can watch the wonderful show that it does go over this in the entire episodes about it. But the trolley problem is the classic example. You are standing by a switch and you see a runaway trolley, and you have the ability to move and change tracks if you so desire. By default, as the picture is showing there, it is going to kill those 5 people on the tracks who are laying there. I think they just needed a nap. It's one of those days, I've been at work sometimes, I get it. Or the person could switch the track and it will go over and kill the one person. And so, in a classic environment like that, the trolley problem is just the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Most people in a vacuum where they are exact same people, no knowledge, no nothing, generally say one person dies, save the 5, because that is, more people saved. And so that is how most governments, if you really go through and think about it or look through the literature, you're going to find most governments on face really do kind of operate on a utilitarian front. They have to think not of the people like as individuals, they have to think of the society as a whole. And when they do think of them as a whole, they have to go through and make decisions that may not seem morally good or morally bad necessarily, but they are going to have to go through and do something. And so they're going to save the most people. And so in World War II, this is the classic justification there, where the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki justified because it ended the global war. And so they thought dropping this bomb on City 1 and City 2 was far better than letting the war continue on. So, yes, they did kill people, but they saved more lives than they killed, at least in their calculus. And that's what happened. And this lovely saying that was in Jesse's packet that I liked: an evil required to prevent a greater evil. It's a nice little switch on my Spider-Man brain that says, with great power comes great responsibility. This was an evil was required to prevent a greater evil. So yeah, it really sucked having to let this one person die over here, but it was better than letting these 5 people die. There's also another layer of utilitarianism that kind of goes through as you're doing some research, and that is the act versus omission policy. And so if you're looking at that utilitarian concept there and you see the guy with his hand on the lever, there is another layer of this, whereas this guy just walks up here and the choice could be just don't touch the lever, meaning I didn't act, therefore I am not directly responsible for the death of the 1 or the 5. Stuff just happened, right? So my omission of action still resulted in something happening, but I don't have any culpability. I don't have any, you know, say in the decision because I didn't do anything. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about in terms of philosophical argumentation, the act omission principle, as well as just like the greatest good for the greatest number utilitarianism. But this is definitely one way you can look at this topic. Either affirmative or negative could look at this and say the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral because if I possess them, it has implications for how many people could die from their usage or their lack of usage. And so you can go through and see all kinds of arguments, and it's usually going to be more of a numbers game because of the number of people who live, or the number of people who die, or the number of people who are saved. And so that is one of those kind of layers that you can consider and think about through this analysis. But this is why I think you need to think about how you want to approach it, because this is going to be a very different approach from door number 2, and that is deontology. And so the Stanford Encyclopedia Dictionary definition here is in contrast to consequentialist theories, which utilitarianism is one of them, the consequences of our actions. Deontological theories judge the morality of choices by criteria different from the state of affairs those choices bring about. So, for instance, in the last example, I said you had to choose whether one person died or five people died. And this would say, no matter how morally good the consequences are, so like saving five people, boy, it sounds better than, only saving one. Some choices are just morally forbidden. Like it's really bad for you to allow that person to die or to actively kill them either way. And that should never be allowed because people are of infinite value. People always have some kind of worth. And who am I to judge that worth? How do I know that that one person is not worth those five other people or vice versa? We all have infinite worth, and therefore that decision is really, really bad. And so, in terms of some examples of that, telling the truth no matter what, even if there is a bad consequence, and I give the funny book example here, but I said a husband lying to his wife about her dress. And that is kind of a low stakes kind of example of this. But there's no like really good answer to that question. Like, if it really did make my wife look fat, I should probably not tell her because I don't want to hurt her feelings. And if I do it in the wrong way, like I did, I always tell my students I did this and I did this knowingly. I did get attacked for it because I decided because I thought I was funny. Hee hee ha ha. I said, my wife says, "Does this dress make me look fat?" And I said, "Yeah, it does." And Shamu called. They want their dress back, implying that the dress made her look like a giant killer whale. That was probably not the right answer. I'm going to let you know that, just FYI, in case you're wondering, that was not the right answer. But in World War II, the civilian deaths of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are why, no matter what happened in this war, even if Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the dropping of the two bombs, was the thing that ended World War II, it was not worth the cost because there were innocent lives who were lost. Men, women, children, people in the hospital, people in elementary schools, all of those kind of things. When the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those were cities full of everyday people, not just military installations, not just, planes that were going to be flying off and attacking. It's not worth the cost because of the moral implications. And so, if you are going to look at the topic through this particular lens, the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. You're going to be looking at the probably the intent of the weapon of a nuclear weapon. So, for instance, if I do have a knife and I could use that knife to cut the butter that goes on the toast, or I could cut the steak that would eventually go into my mouth. That the knife has a purpose beyond just stabbing a human being who is coming at me with a weapon of their own. A nuclear weapon, not a whole lot of other applications because it's really, in the topic especially, it's called a nuclear weapon. We're not talking about the technology of fusion fission, that could be a power plant or that could be in other kind of implications, but this is a nuclear weapon. And by the definition of weapon, it's something that's going to explode with force meant to go boom and take out my target. And so if you're using a affirmative approach to this, you would say there's some deontological reasoning that says any kind of weapon that is designed solely to kill and kill indiscriminately and to leave like an existential threat to existence in and of itself, probably a bad thing and probably not moral, so therefore it's immoral. The negative, though, could also go through this same kind of framing, deontology, because they could be saying this from a state perspective that a state, a government, the United States, China, Russia, anybody, their sole duty is to their citizens. And in order to protect their citizens, they need to have options. And one of those options is to protect themselves and to do it with any means necessary. Like, I don't think anyone at the time was like, you know what we should do? We should go drop this bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't think they wanted to do that, but they felt that that was the only path forward, and therefore it was a moral option to protect their own citizens. And so when you're looking at deontology, realize that both utilitarianism and deontology are options that can be used on either side of the debate, but they are fundamentally different approaches to the debate topic. And that's just one of two different options. That's right. There's a third. There's a third path. The chosen one. There is another. All right. And we have this one other path that I'm going to offer up as an option as you approach the topic. And this is one of political realism. I'm not really sure where it all falls on the old spectrum because I don't really think everything boils down into left or right or up or down. But political realism, by definition here, is realists consider the principal actors in the international arena to be the states, which are concerned with their own security, act in pursuit of their own national interests, and struggle for power. And so, if you think of political realism, in my view, this is probably, the closest because this is what we do in the real world. Yeah, I don't want to like kill anyone or use a gun ever in my life. I mean, that's my own personal stance. I'd rather not. But you know what? If a burglar comes in my home and threatens my wife and children, I'm probably going to be doing something about it. Let's be real, right? And so real world impacts matter in this particular case, and states generally serve their own interests first. And I think we can understand this because if you think about it, it's just an extension of what we do as individuals, right? Like I'm not saying we're all super self-centered and all those kind of things, right? But by default, if I'm hungry, I want to feed myself. I don't think, hey, I wonder if the other people across the room, let alone across the globe, have food and stuff available to them. No, I'm just going to go to Mickey D's and get my lunch or whatever, right? Um, if you think of this on a national scale, it also kind of makes sense because your brain is just going to go, hey, United States president and Congress and heck, justice system, et cetera. Who are you going to protect and do things with first and foremost? The American citizens that you are part of and that you have elected officials from and that you have a direct tie to that community, right? There's going to be a whole lot of things on that front, but it just kind of comes down to me first, just on a national front. And so if we look at the Cold War, this was all focused on military capabilities, not just intent and usage. So it didn't, I mean, yes, we were developing like nukes to keep up with the Russians, but we were also making sure that other people weren't going to like attack or do anything bad to us. It was somewhat posturing and making sure that we were, the top dog, but it was also about making sure that it wasn't just about like, hey, I'm going to shoot you with this missile. It was more like, hey, I could shoot you with this missile. Hey, do you want to make some trade deals? We did use that as, very tough bargaining tools, if you will. And so states serve the needs of their citizens and prioritize survival. And if you want to think about it as another term, you can think of it as pragmatic. I can't say words. It's very pragmatic. They're going to be looking at things through their perspective first and foremost. And you can use this on both sides in a lot of ways. I do think it kind of lends itself more to the negative. However, you could say the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral, and say a political realist would say that we know that this bomb is an existential threat that just needs to be gone. Heck, we already just talked about a 2017 treaty that was signed by 80 plus countries and those kind of things. It says like this is the correct stance. We know it is, and it's best that we're getting on board with this plan in order for the good of humanity in general, as well as the globe. But it will also advance my cause because insert reasons. Or you could say this on the negative, which I do think it's a little bit more negative framework option, where you say hey, this bomb is essential to my security, essential to my plan to keep, Pakistan, India, whatever, out of my own country. And I need to have every option that I possibly can in order to protect my citizens. And that includes nuke weapons. And so, you can use this kind of framing, but again, it's just all about how you want to approach the topic. It's all about what kind of evidence you find. It's all about what kind of arguments that you are finding to be more good for not only your understanding of the topic, but your places that you're debating, your circuit, your opponents, those kind of things. But those are the three different framing options that I'd really like focus on and think about, because I do think that picking one of those lanes is going to help you get further down the road on this topic and to make sure that you are, getting further and understanding the topic. All right, in terms of the value and criterion, I do have a few suggestions here, and I do just keep these on one slide because I do think that most of the time, and these should be things that you can probably think about for both sides of the debate and consider how they approach this particular topic area. Now, the easiest, and it is kind of hard to believe, but the easiest one is probably going to be morality. It's really easy to understand why, because there's this word right here in the topic, and it's called immoral. When the topic area itself has a word in it that does correspond to one of the biggest value criterion objects in existence, hey, why fight the easy path, right? You can go through and say morality is your value, decide which approach to morality works best. In this case, I would probably say utilitarianism, or I would say deontology, and then justify your approach via evidence and via analysis that works for your particular side of the debate. Justice is one that works out pretty well as well. And it's also a classic one because these actions that we take with nuke weapons could violate justice. There's this lovely thing called just war theory that you can look up, and it has a great deal of information about the rules of engagement that we have as a country. Well, not only a country, because if you look at the topic again, there is no country listed in there. That's one thing that I am stressing with my own debaters of not just using United States specific evidence because they're used to using US and understand the United States. Instead, we have to look at this from just the idea of possession of nuke weapons is immoral. And so you can look at it from different countries' perspective, but I've seen a whole lot of people looking at things for just war theory because it says here are the rules of engagement when two countries or two parties engage in combat in some way, shape, or form. And there are things we're not supposed to do, like kill innocent civilians and stuff. I'd also offer up, just two more: national security, virtue ethics. Again, you can look those up on your own and decide if those are going for your particular stance. But national security would be just what it sounds like, your nation's security and what you do to do that. Does nuke weapons actually make it better or do they make it worse? There could be an argument either way, especially as, emerging powers and such have gone through. India and Pakistan would be interesting to see for that particular viewpoint because it did change their engagement with one another when they both got nukes. And then virtue ethics is just this idea that we have some particular ethical code based on our country of origin or our belief system. And you can look up in that. There's quite a bit there. On the criterion front, which is how you get your value, once you've chosen your option from the first list, you choose your option from the bottom list, and then you put it together. And the biggest thing on the criterion is it always should be some kind of like weighable mechanism, like how do we do this and what do we do? So the affirmative I put down there for respecting moral duty. There's going to be a whole lot of different things for the moral duty we have or to avoid moral harms to individual. Kantian ethics will be a big part of that particular stance. Minimizing risk is a little bit more utilitarian, more specifically negative utilitarianism, meaning that we're not looking at the greatest good per se, but we're minimizing the harm. And so that one usually does work out pretty well for this particular topic because we're talking about nuke weapons that have a design to kill as many as possible. And if we're minimizing the harm, that would fit right under negative utilitarianism pretty well. And then we have protecting human dignity, another, more Kantian ethical deontology kind of view. But it does have this idea that we should make sure that humans have worth and we're protecting and pushing that worth more so. On the negative, we could be minimizing harm simply because we are stopping bad guys, with the nuke weapon available option. We could effectively be fulfilling our state's duty of protecting our uh, citizens in a particular way, or we could protect hegemony, which is just that idea of our own power. If this topic were true and we said nuke weapons are immoral, we probably have to do something about that immorality and get rid of nuke weapons. Well, what would that do with the balance of power? How would that shake out? Now, this topic, again, is not a policy topic. It's just a topic of value. So we don't really necessarily have to go into that. What if this happened? Would X, Y, Z happen? But depending on what part of the country you're in and what kind of circuit you go to, it could lend itself to more of those policy decisions where those outcomes are something you have to discuss. So your mileage is going to vary, but I do want you to just plant the seed of that idea that you probably do want to think about: how does this actually minimize harm? How does this effectively fulfill my state's duties? Meaning, how does the government actually protect its citizens? And is it fulfilling that role in the status quo or in the world where we have nukes or don't have nukes, depending on how that viewpoint changes on your decision calculus? So this is the weighing mechanism. This is like how to view the round, the value, and the criterion is how to weigh and prove that you are achieving morality, or prove and show that you are being a just government, or prove and show that you are emphasizing national security or the ethical standards that you have. And so making sure you're connecting those dots together is going to be essential when you're going through the topic. And the biggest thing I always say is just to make sure that your arguments that you get connect back together. So your topic is the possession of nuclear weapons are immoral. How do you prove that more immoral action through your analysis of morality or your analysis of justice? And then how does that connect to this weighing mechanism of respecting moral duty or minimizing risk. So it's always good to just make sure that you're connecting those dots as thoroughly as you can. Which gets us to some potential AF arguments. And for these slides, I just put five ideas down on the screen. And I'm going to talk about them just a little bit each, but really in my head, this is not about giving you this 100% comprehensive, beautiful, here you go, run out the door kind of thing. But I do want you to be thinking about how does this argument work? And does this argument make sense to me? And what kind of evidence, which again, we're going to have a packet of it afterward, after the presentation to give you a starter set, but what kind of evidence would I need to prove that this is true? So here are five affirmative arguments that we can look at. The first one is possession implies willingness to use. So this argument you can probably make sense in a lot of different ways. I like to try to make sure it makes sense to my students who are brand new to debate or judges that are brand new to debate. And this is just that idea that, hey, possessing something means I'm probably going to use it. If I do have a gun in my household, which I don't, it's okay. But if I do have a gun in my household, that implies that at some point, in some way, shape, or form, I think I might have to use it. It's not just there for show, which I guess with guns, they might actually be a collector gun, like an antique kind of thing, I suppose. I don't think we have antique nukes on display in any place just yet. But either way, possession implies a willingness to use. If there were a scenario where a bad thing happened, a burglar came in, my house was, like ransacked or something of that nature, and I did have a gun in my house, whether it's on my hip or in a gun safe, the idea here is just having it alone means I am willing at some point in some scenario, whatever that might be, it means I'm going to use it. Now, I don't want to use it. I have no desire to use it. I could say that all day long, but ultimately, the affirmative argument would be that just having the dang thing in my possession, in my house, means that I could use it. The same is true here with a nuclear weapon. If we have, and I think the previous slide said 5,000-ish weapons of mass destruction, the fact that we have them as a country means that we at some point are willing to use it. And in fact, America is the one who has the least to say on this particular one because we're the ones who have used them, right? We have used them. And just like good old Tony Stark said, you have to use them at least once in order to prove a point, kind of thing, right? And that's where we get that deterrence factor. We say that we used them once and therefore we could use them again. The affirmative side would say that's really wrong. It's immoral because, hey, yeah, we used them once, twice, in fact. We learned our lesson, never use them again, kind of deal. But that is what's going on there. So possession implies a willingness to use. The second argument that I would go through there is that a threat alone takes innocence hostage. You can find that argument under like hostage taking with nukes, or innocents are threatened, or innocents could be killed. The same idea applies from Hiroshima and Nagasaki again. If notice that there are two cities in that list, right? Two. So when we dropped the first bomb, we said, "Hey, are you ready to surrender?" And when they didn't, we dropped a second bomb. Then they surrendered. And so that threat of we are going to drop another bomb is kind of important because that is how, again, we kind of ended World War II in history sense, but also it's immoral in the fact that when we have this bomb and when this bomb goes off, it doesn't just kill the enemy soldiers. It doesn't just blow up the enemy ships, or it doesn't just blow up the enemy planes. It is an indiscriminate killer because it is a big old bomb that goes boom and takes out everything in its path. And if you've seen some of those pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki from from World War II, it's pretty bad when you're seeing like shadows burned onto, concrete and such. And so that is a threat. And that is the worst kind of threat known to man. At least that's what the affirmative would argue, because it can indiscriminately kill. And it's often referred to as an existential threat, meaning it could end existence as we know it. And I was trying to explain this idea to a student of mine today, and they were just not getting what it meant. And I said, like, hey, if I threaten to punch you, I don't have the biggest arms or anything, like you might get a black eye. If I threaten to shoot you, especially if I'm a bad shot or something, like you might get a hole in your body, it'll heal. You're not going to love it, but you'll get better. If I nuke you, yeah, you're done, right? Like there's no coming back. You are toast, dust. You're done for. And so that is kind of the threat alone that makes it really bad, because if I have a nuke, that is very immoral, that I'm threatening not only you as a country, but you as a, human being existence wise. I mean, your country, right? Like your entire way of life, depending on what kind of bomb and what kind of, size you have and those kind of things. So that's number two. Number three, deterrence alone or only from immoral means, it violates our duty. So if I deter you through this fear, if I just deter you from action because you're afraid, that's kind of not the nicest thing to do. Like for one, but it's also not the right way a state should be doing things. Like, right, we should be building relationships. We should be doing this, that, and the other thing. It's kind of on the moral bad side of things, which is why immoral applies to threaten and put fear into your hearts. I guess, Batman does, make you fear the night and those kind of things, but not exactly law enforcement 101. He's a vigilante for a reason, right? And even he doesn't kill. The nuke, it's going to kill you. It's going to kill you good. So the deterrence only from immoral means really violates the duty of the state to maximize, again, the good and minimize the harm. And it fails to do that because its sole purpose as a nuclear weapon is to kill and to kill everything that you know. So pretty bad. The fourth argument, intergenerational justice. It violates future generations. If I blow up a nuke and take out your city, there ain't no more babies. There ain't no more grandchildren, great grandchildren. And in fact, this one gets real interesting when you factor in the radiation factor and the zone that it covers and the birth rates and oh my goodness, genetic mutations and all kinds of stuff that I would say good in a debate sense because it's interesting to think of the implications, but a actual horrible, horrible, horrible thing in terms of a moral code. And so if we are doing something that like eradicates an entire species or a, generation of people, it's probably not a good thing on a moral scale. And so when you're thinking of this topic, you're going to be able to find intergenerational justice. I mean, like it just is going to take out a whole bunch of people. Now, thankfully, most of this in terms of research is in theory because we haven't had a lot of in implementation level things. But it is something that's going to be cutting out a huge amount of people and destroying future generations, making new health problems. I'm sure there's a whole lot of things on that front from the Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Japan front, where you can really go over the implications of that amount of radiation and such. And so, very, very much so. And yeah, you get to violate the planet for like thousands of years here, folks. So go big impacts. And then finally, risk is too great and impacts the whole world, the whole shebang. There are going to be plenty of pieces of evidence that you can see that talk about how the radiation will not only harm future generations, but it'll harm the dirt, it'll harm the water, it'll harm the air, it'll burn off the atmosphere. And then we're really getting the policy debate fun where now the planet is going to die 15 times over. But when you're talking about something that really could destroy the planet 15 times over, I suppose I can't really complain about policy impacts being crazy. Because if this stuff does go off, I mean, there's plenty of mutually assured destruction things you could read that talk about how the risk is too great and it impacts every single man, woman, and child on the planet. So it doesn't matter if you're my friend or my enemy if we both die together in a nuclear blaze, right? And so there's not really a good stance on that one if things go. So all kinds of things. Yeah, and that's not even touching upon, like Jesse is saying there, the whole idea of if we have nukes at all, we got to test them. If we have nukes at all, we could have an accident. If we have nukes at all, we could go through all kinds of things. The affirmative is just going to be saying, better not to risk it. Let's just put our toys away and go home, or take them apart and go home. So there's a whole lot of implications going on there. But hopefully that gives you at least some ideas that you can be thinking about in terms of the affirmative side of the debate, whether you're connecting it to morality, whether you're connecting it to like government legitimacy, whether you're connecting it via a utilitarian framework or a deontological framework, or even political realism. Uh, what I'd recommend you do is you think about how this evidence all functions, thinks about how it should go together, and think about what argument would be the strongest for you to make in your 6-minute affirmative case. Because you want to make sure you're building a strong case, a strong foundation, and connecting those dots as much as you possibly can back to how the possession of nuke weapons is going to be immoral in general. So it's going to be pretty important that you get there. All right, in terms of the negative, we also have 5 arguments here. So now I got to say nuke weapons are good. Put on my nuke weapons are good hat, I swear. Actually, before I get that, just realize that that is actually another statement here. The negative's job, the affirmative does have a job in this round. Their job is to say the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. The negative doesn't necessarily have to do the exact opposite of that. Like the negative can indeed say nuke weapons are moral, but that's why I said at the very beginning, if you recall, you could also be arguing that nuke weapons are amoral, right? You could be going for that middle ground kind of approach and say they have no moral worth one way or the other. Just another thing to throw out there. Like the affirmative does indeed have to go immoral, but the negative doesn't necessarily have to say they're moral. All right, back to the spiel here. The first argument is very classic. Possessing nuke weapons prevents wars. In fact, this is what we've said since 1945-ish, and we've said, hey, we've got nukes, and you can probably find the tagline everywhere on the planet where it says no two nuke powers have ever fought since, World War II, and it's because we got nukes, baby. Nukes are the reason. And so possessing these nuclear weapons has prevented war, or at least that is what the sales pitch is. And so if we have nukes, they can't be immoral because they've prevented a whole lot of more immoral acts. And so the weapon itself isn't immoral, it's people who are. And here's how the nuke weapon has actually done some good for us and for everything. And so this is going to be deterrence good, baby. And deterrence has worked, and deterrence only works because of those nuke weapons. And that is going to be a pretty, I would say that's probably the most common and easiest line the negative can do because, not that we can prove that this is the sole or only or 100% every single time option. It's also one of those, it's kind of hard not to argue that, you know what, we really haven't had a super duper bad world war since World War II. Now, there's been other wars and, Ukraine, Russia, other places right now kind of thing. But right now we can say for the most part, nuke powers haven't gone toe to toe directly. We've just had proxies and other things. So that's got to be better, right? Second argument, possessing reduces incentives for aggression. So, like, people aren't arming up as crazily. People aren't going to town as badly as they used to because they don't want to get a risk. I guess that's risk reward. Like, there's no reward big enough to see what would happen if I fight the nuke power. So, that is another kind of, I guess that would still be deterrence in a way, but it's for a different cause. And so nukes are going to be there and they're going to be an incentive for people not to be aggressive. Because once I get them, I can like calm down because I know no one's going to attack me. I can go to more peaceful pursuits and do other things. But possessing reduces those incentives for aggression. I don't need to focus so much on, grabbing more territory and doing things of that nature. I got a nuke, baby. I can like calm down and just like relax a little bit. Maybe, invest in infrastructure for my own nation or something. Who knows? The third one, nations have a duty to protect their citizens. This is, the classic one again. Like my main duty is to protect my citizens. And in order to do that, I need to do whatever I feel is necessary. And in the case of my political geographical region, I keep getting attacked by my enemies despite bigger tanks, despite better planes, despite better bullets. You know what will stop them? Nukes, baby. And bada boom, bada bing, let's invest and let's do that. So nations have a duty to protect their citizens. And when you are a nation state, and this one's a fun one in my head to go over, because if you are looking at your own nation and your own nation first, you got to realize that, yeah, I believe in rights and I believe in this and that or the other thing. But if the United States falls, do I have the right to vote in America anymore? No, because America's gone, right? And so a nation state has a duty to keep itself around. And if they don't keep themselves around, they can't keep your rights protected. And so you could be arguing on this particular point about how a nation state is the foundation of all rights as we know them, at least some of those moral rights that the affirmative might be saying are the most important. And we don't really get access to them if we don't have a country protecting us to exercise them. And so chicken or egg might be some part of that discussion, but you will have the ability to talk about how rights and duties might both be present, but you do have to make sure that you are having a nation state to begin with in order to have those rights. And so that might be an interesting argument to go. Which one comes first? The fourth argument, nuclear weapons provide international stability. I know that the, National Proliferation Treaty and Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, or the United Nations might have something to say on this bad boy. But nuclear weapons provide international stability. We've had a pretty good run. We have this United Nations. They've been in power in terms of stuff for a very long time. We've had a fairly stable system across the entire region. And the argument would be had is that all of that comes back once again, deterrence, baby. It's from those nukes, from those powers. And, the good old boys club that started back in those 1970s or whatever with that NPT, yeah, you know me, that is the same power structure that's there today. Sure, there's a couple more members, but not as many as there could have been if we went all willy-nilly and let everybody have nukes. So let's keep this stability going. And you could run all kinds of, real world impacts of economic stability, political realism. We want to keep the system going. And the best way to do that is just to keep the power structure as close as it is right now. And I kind of like that because I'm America, baby, right? Who wouldn't want to stay on top for all time? So nuclear weapons provide that international stability, and the only way to stay stable is to not rock a boat really, really hard because that boat could go under, and then we don't want that. So let's make sure that we keep the boat afloat and keep those shipping lanes open and keep all the good stuff flowing. And yeah, hegemony, baby. Final one on this front is it's morally better than conventional war. Again, we go back to that saying of, yeah, this might be evil, but it's not as evil as other things. And so having a nuke, especially one we've only used twice, seems to be pretty good. We didn't have to send more soldiers over to die on a beach in Normandy, right? We didn't, now we have drones to do those kind of things too. But it's still morally better than conventional war. We'd much rather just have a big old bomb that we threaten people with, but pinky swear never ever to use, than to actually, have regular warfare with regular bad things happening. And so, as long as we can keep this system going where we just threaten everybody with existential destruction, it's still better than actually fighting. So, would we rather have this game, so to speak, where we rattle our sabers and say, if you don't do what we ask, we're going to nuke you to kingdom come and back again? As long as we never do it, it's got to be pretty good, right? I mean, it's only threats, it's only fear mongering. That's okay. That's kind of what we're looking at that point, right? And so the negative could argue that, hey, affirmative, you're saying that the nuke weapons are immoral. We're saying they're not immoral. We're saying they're essential to our state's existence, and they're so much more moral than XYZ. And so you could go down that lovely front if you want and just do that bad boy because you can't really fight results, folks, right? Does that make it moral? That's another whole level of the question, because we can do all kinds of immoral things twice a day and, those kind of deals. But the question here is also always make sure you're connecting these arguments back to the statement. Is the possession of nuke weapons immoral? The negative would have to say in some way, shape, or form that they are moral or that they are amoral, and they'd have to go through and connect it. Once again, are you doing it through utilitarianism? Are you doing it through deontology? Or are you doing it through some political realism lens? But make sure you're connecting those dots back to your framework, your justice, your morality, your virtue ethics, whatever the case might be, and showing how this functions through your criterion of maximizing goodness or protecting innocent lives or whatever the case might be. It's always good to make sure that you're connecting those back together. So the next step, and I'm probably making my reference way too old because I say Voltron assemble because I'm an old man who thought of Voltron coming together to form that lovely lion soldier guy. But maybe Avengers assemble would have been more timely. But either way, what I would recommend for you to do from this point forward, especially as a beginner, and if you are a more seasoned veteran, it's still the same process. But first, figuring out what definitions work best for your particular stance on this particular topic is really essential. Then, once you have that down, figuring out what value works best. It could be justice, it could be morality, it could be something completely off my list. That list is not meant to be the list that you could only do it on, but it is a different approach to start off from. And then the criterion, how do you achieve that value? How are you going to do this? And then the contention level arguments, you're going to have to think about what works and what doesn't work for your particular case. In the end, your goal is going to be to have a 6 minute affirmative case. And if you're the negative, because you're going to have to do both sides of the debate, flip side debate, you're going to have a 3 to 4 minute negative case. At least that's what we run around these parts. And once your case is done, you edit, you revise, you time, you go over it with your coach, and you make sure everything makes sense. You try to dot the I's, cross the T's, and then off to rebuttal prep and figuring out what the opponent might say. So that is all I have there for this particular section, what I'm going to do here is just pause in just 1 second and we're going to end the recording. But I did want to say thank you, and I hope that that was informative. And what we like to do after this lovely presentation is just spend some time to allow for some question and answer period. We don't claim to have every answer in the world. This topic is new to us too, at least, well, it's been around the block a few times. We're not going to lie. But in terms of that, like we can't answer every question for every circuit and for every tournament and for every stance, but we are trying to educate and try to get that emphasis so you understand how things are going to be going.